Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, your essential shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we're immersing ourselves in, well, one of the planet's most rigorous, dynamic, and ecologically critical environments, the world of mangroves.
Yes, these are the really unique forests that have evolved to live right on the edge, that intertidal zone where the land and the sea are constantly interacting.
And our mission today is to conduct a really detailed deep dive into their characteristics, their fundamental functions, and importantly, their critical conservation status, sticking strictly to the sources you provided.
Absolutely. And when you start digging into how they function, critical almost feels like an understatement.
Right. Mangroves aren't just trees standing in water. They are, well, structurally and conceptually the central pillars of coastal ecology. And they're absolutely vital instruments for disaster risk reduction, like nature's own coastal engineers.
That's a great way to put it. And to understand that marvel, we first need to set the scene. Mangroves thrive in what's specifically defined as a brackish water ecosystem.
Brackish water. Okay.
This environment has a salinity that fluctuates quite dramatically, but typically it ranges between 5 and 35 parts per thousand, or ppt.
That range seems key because it highlights this constant state of flux, doesn't it? It's not fresh water. It's not fully oceanic brine. It's like an osmotic tightrope walk, constantly changing with tides, rain, river discharge.
Precisely. It's a highly complex environment, not just variable chemistry, but also physical extremes. We're talking estuaries, tidal marshes, the mangrove swamps themselves, all dealing with waterlogging and, crucially, a substrate that's inherently unstable and anaerobic, basically lacking oxygen.
Okay, let's unpack this then. You've got salinity that would kill most plants, mud that would suffocate most roots, and constant tidal shifts demanding real mechanical resilience. How does a tree even survive, let alone thrive, in conditions basically designed to prevent life?
It really requires mandatory physiological adaptations that are, well, nothing short of genius. The sources detail several key features that allow mangrove species, which by definition are halophytes, meaning they tolerate salty conditions, to exist here.
Let's start with maybe the most dramatic one. Their unique way of reproducing. That's often called live birth for plants, right?
That's Vivipary. And this adaptation is absolutely non-negotiable for mangrove survival. Instead of dropping a traditional seed, which would, almost instantly perish or just get washed away in that harsh, salty, waterlogged environment.
Yeah, it wouldn't stand a chance.
Exactly. So the seed actually germinates while still attached to the parent plant.
So the parent is like a mobile nursery protecting the really fragile initial stages. What happens then once the seedling, or I think the term is propagule, detaches?
Right, the propagule. It continues to grow on the parent, often developing this heavy, elongated root and shoot system. When it finally drops, it's already hardened, physiologically prepared, and often pencil-shaped.
Why pencil-shaped?
Well, that shape allows it to potentially stab directly into the soft mud below. Or, if it doesn't land perfectly, it can float, sometimes for weeks or even months, until it finds a suitable, less turbulent spot to root. So this adaptation fundamentally overcomes that huge problem of germination shock in saline water. It gives the future tree an exponential head start.
That's one massive problem-solved reproduction. But the plant still has to live there. It needs to draw water and nutrients from incredibly salty water without drying out, which is that constant threat of osmotic stress. How do they manage the salt?
They employ fascinating and quite diverse strategies for salt management. Our sources mention that mangrove leaves are typically quite thick and specialized. Some species are primarily salt secretors.
Secretors?
Yeah, their leaves contain specialized salt-secreting glands. They actively pull the salt into the plant tissue, but then push the excess salt out onto the leaf surface. You can sometimes even see salt crystals forming there.
Huh. So they're essentially sweating out the brine, using energy to keep their internal chemistry manageable.
That's a pretty good analogy for the secretors, yes. But other mangrove species use a different, equally sophisticated mechanism. They're called salt excluders.
Excluders? How does that work?
They achieve ultrafiltration right at the root level. Their root membranes are highly specialized to physically block the majority of salt uptake from the start. They only allow fresh water, essentially, to pass through into the plant's circulatory system.
Wow.
It's a critical distinction, and it really showcases the adaptive diversity within the whole mangrove community.
That is some deep-level biological filtering. Okay, now let's tackle the ground itself. These intertidal mudflats are hypoxic or anaerobic, meaning virtually no oxygen for the roots to breathe. How do they cope with that?
This brings us to another unique structure, designed specifically for gas exchange. The sources highlight the importance of lenticelated bark. Lenticels are basically small pores in the bark that facilitate this crucial gas exchange with the atmosphere.
And this connects to those more famous breathing structures we often see poking up out of the mud, right? The pointy root things.
Absolutely. While the sources focus specifically on the lenticelated bark, this function is intrinsically linked to structures like pneumatophores. Those are the specialized vertical root extensions that project up out of the oxygen-poor mud.
Ah, pneumatophores. Got it.
The lenticels on the pneumatophores and on the trunk itself draw atmospheric oxygen down to the submerged root system. This is absolutely mandatory for survival. If the root system can't respire, the whole tree basically starves of the energy it needs for everything else, like salt exclusion and vivipary.
Makes sense.
The overall process also often generates coppices. Those are new shoots that can grow from the root crown or base, helping the species persist despite all the environmental stress.
It's just fascinating how these intense individual survival tricks, vivipary, salt management, breathing mud, scale up. The resulting dense, interlinked forest provides these huge global-level ecological services. The sources rightly call them vital bioshields, and we really need to spend some time analyzing exactly how this natural defense system works.
It's an indispensable line of defense, truly. Firstly, just their physical presence acts as a massive natural barrier. That complex matrix of roots and stems have been proven time and again to protect coastal lands from incredibly destructive events. We're talking tsunamis, powerful hurricanes, and severe floods.
It's not just a simple physical wall, though, is it? The way they protect is more nuanced than that.
It is. It's really about energy dissipation. The dense foliage and critically that dense interwoven root system of the mangroves significantly reduces the speed and energy of incoming waves and storm surges.
So they slow the water down?
Exactly. They actively moderate monsoonal tidal floods and dramatically reduce the inundation of coastal lowlands. By slowing the water, they also allow sediments to settle out, which protects human infrastructure further inland.
And speaking of sediments, their ability to trap silt is crucial for coastal stabilization too, isn't it?
Absolutely critical. Their root systems are highly efficient at trapping fine sediments and organic matter carried by rivers and tides. This process is essential in preventing coastal soil erosion. In fact, they actively build up the coastline over time. They are living, growing, self-repairing seawalls.
Amazing. And beyond just protection, they're biological powerhouses for the entire marine food web, right? And directly support local human communities too.
That's the second major pillar of benefits. The mangrove ecosystem is an incredibly efficient nursery. It enhances the natural recycling of nutrients by breaking down organic matter. And, maybe most importantly, it provides a safe and favorable environment for the breeding, spawning, and rearing of numerous fishes, crabs, shrimps, and other aquatic life.
So the foundation of coastal fisheries, really.
It really is. That rich biodiversity is the backbone. And local communities benefit directly, not just from the fish, but from the forest itself. Well, they supply direct economic benefits through sustainable harvesting. This includes things like woods and firewood, resources for housing and energy. Plus, medicinal plants and edible plants are often collected from the forest floor. They represent a multifaceted source of sustainable livelihood, provided they're managed responsibly.
Okay, and finally, we absolutely have to discuss what is perhaps their most critical function in the 21st century. Their role in mitigating climate change, this whole concept of blue carbon.
Yes, blue carbon. It refers specifically to the carbon sequestered and stored by coastal and marine ecosystems. That includes tidal marshes, seagrasses, and crucially for our discussion, mangroves. What elevates mangroves to this kind of elite status as a climate tool is their incredible efficiency.
Right, I saw the statistic in the sources. It's a massive multiplier effect compared to other forests.
They are truly specialized carbon sinks. These coastal systems are highly adept at sequestering carbon, both in their thick biomass of the wood and leaves, but most importantly, in their deep anoxic soil layers.
Anoxic meaning oxygen poor.
Exactly. And the sources emphasize they store up to 5 times more carbon per unit area than many terrestrial forests, whether temperate or tropical.
And that up to 5 times more depends on that storage mechanism in the mud, right? If oxygen got in, that carbon would just decompose and go back into the atmosphere?
Precisely. The anaerobic nature of the mudflats prevents rapid decomposition by microbes. So when mangrove leaves, twigs, roots, and wood fall and get buried in that oxygen-poor soil, the carbon gets effectively locked away, potentially for millennia.
Wow.
This mechanism is why preventing their destruction and promoting their restoration is such a significant, measurable global tool in countering the rise of atmospheric carbon. They are specialized, high-performance climate infrastructure built by nature.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting geographically. Let's shift our focus now to the specific places detailed in our sources, because the Indian landscape hosts some globally significant mangrove forests, and they often differ based on geology and environmental pressures.
We absolutely have to start with the Sundarbans in West Bengal. This is globally significant, the largest single tract of mangrove forest in the world. It's located in that massive delta where the Brahmaputra and Ganges rivers meet and flow into the Bay of Bengal. It really defines the high-end complexity of this ecosystem.
And the sources give a remarkably detailed picture of the zonation within the Sundarbans, how the types of trees change based on how high the land is and how salty the water is.
Yes, that stratification, that zonation is key to understanding the system's resilience. In the lower tidal zones where the land gets flooded frequently and the salinity is high, you find the real pioneer species, the highly salt-tolerant ones like Soneraceae avitinia. They're the first line.
Okay, the tough pioneers. And then as the elevation increases, meaning less frequent tidal flooding.
As you move up into the intermediate higher zones, the competition changes and the dominant species shift. You get the classic, often taller mangrove species. The sources specifically highlight Rhizophora and Bugura alongside something called the Excicaria Cereops forest complex.
And that complex is significant.
Extremely. The sources note it covers nearly 70% of the entire Sundarbans area. It forms the real structural bulk of the forest in those middle zones.
70%. That's a huge dominance by just that one complex. What about the highest parts, the areas exposed to the least amount of tidal influence?
Right at the top, that's where you find the Heritieri forest. These areas often have less salt stress, but face more competition from land-based plants. The Heritieri forest is typically characterized by a really thick undergrowth, often composed of phoenix and nipa palms.
So the zonation perfectly shows that trade-off. High-stress areas need maximum salt adaptation, while lower-stress areas allow for maybe bigger trees, which are probably more valuable as timber.
Exactly. It illustrates that biological balance very clearly.
Okay, let's move down the east coast. The big rivers flowing into the Bay of Bengal continue to shape where mangroves grow, right?
They certainly do. The East Coast benefits from that large river input, forming major estuaries. For instance, the Godavari Krishna Delta in Andhra Pradesh sees mangrove swamps occurring, as the source says, in profusion in the intertidal mudflats on both sides of the creeks. That's another major, pretty contiguous system.
And then further north along that coast, there's a site mentioned that's important for its link to specific wildlife.
Ah, yes, that refers to Bhitarkanika, which is implicitly located in Odisha. The sources specifically highlight its importance as a specialized habitat where you can view gharials, the fish-eating crocodiles, in their natural environment.
So it shows how these mangroves support even apex predators whose survival depends on the health of the whole estuarine system.
Precisely. But it's not all positive news on the East Coast. The sources point out some serious degradation further south.
Whereabouts?
That rather grim assessment applies to areas in Tamil Nadu, specifically Pichavaram and Vidaranyam. These sites are explicitly mentioned as being significantly degraded.
And do the sources say why?
Yes, they pinpoint the primary cause: the conversion of the fringing mangrove areas for the construction of intensive aquaculture ponds and salt pans. It's a very direct link shown between local commercial development and ecological decline.
That's stark. Okay, let's contrast this with the West Coast and the islands. How do things look over there?
Well, the West Coast presents a very different geographical picture. The coastline there is generally characterized by much narrower estuaries and creeks. Think of places in Maharashtra, Goa, and Karnataka. The mangroves found there are described in the sources as generally smaller in scale, mostly scrubby, and significantly degraded. They just don't have that massive deltaic support system you see in West Bengal or Andhra Pradesh.
So generally less expensive and more impacted. Yet the sources also confirm that the remote island territories have some incredibly pristine mangrove systems.
That's certainly true for the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Mangroves are highly prevalent there, and interestingly, they often coexist right alongside seagrasses growing on the coral reefs.
So you see an integration there.
Exactly. It highlights a high degree of connection between these coastal marine ecosystems. The mangroves stabilize the shore, and filter sediment running off the land, which in turn benefits the sensitive seagrasses and coral ecosystems just offshore.
This naturally raises an important question then. Given these absolutely irreplaceable ecological services, coastal protection, carbon storage, livelihood support, what are the specific human-driven threats that are compromising these vital ecosystems? And what legal measures are actually in place to try and counter them?
The threats are pretty systemic, unfortunately, and they usually fall into three main categories, all tied directly to human activity along the coast. The most visible and immediate threat is habitat conversion.
Like we saw with the shrimp farms.
Exactly. That drive for commercial profit leads to the conversion of those fringed mangrove areas for intensive aquaculture, specifically shrimp farms, as noted so clearly in Pitchavaram and Vidaranam, or for developing salt pans.
So the drive for short-term profit literally wipes out the natural long-term coastal defense mechanism. It seems incredibly short-sighted.
It often is. The ecosystem services provided by mangroves are usually completely undervalued, until, of course, a disaster strikes. The second major threat category is pollution.
From what sources?
The sources specifically identify the dumping of industrial effluents and civic or industrial waste. This is particularly noted along major estuaries, which naturally become centers for commerce and settlement places, like the Hooghly in West Bengal and the Zuari in Goa are mentioned. These estuaries are used for fishing and transport, but simultaneously they become dumping grounds for waste.
So we're seeing not just physical removal, but also this long-term chemical degradation poisoning the system.
And this is often compounded by just general coastal development. The banks of estuarine channels are really favored locations for human settlements, for ports, for industries. This encroachment often involves reclaiming those fringing mangrove areas, which then has cascading negative effects.
Like what?
Well, obstructing the migratory routes that are crucial for fish and prawn breeding cycles, polluting the water and sediment. It leads inevitably to the degradation of the entire estuary's health and productivity.
It's clear the threats are persistent and varied. So what legal infrastructure does India have in place to try and shield these areas from all these development pressures?
India has established a pretty strong policy foundation through the Coastal Regulation Zone, or CRZ notification. Under this, mangroves and coral reefs are designated as ecologically sensitive areas. They fall under the highest protection category, CRZ-I.
CRZ-I. Okay, what does that classification actually mean in practical terms for, say, a developer wanting to build something nearby?
It means the key restriction is pretty absolute. No new constructions are permitted within these CRZ-I zones. The clear intent is to maintain these vital natural buffers as pristine as possible.
No new construction. That sounds strong.
It is. However, the sources also detail some specific, carefully controlled exceptions. These reflect the reality of trying to balance conservation with national needs and development priorities.
Ah, okay. Let's explore those specific exceptions because they probably reveal some of the policy complexities and tensions at play.
They certainly do. The exceptions show these competing priorities. For instance, construction is allowed for projects specifically related to the Department of Atomic Energy. Secondly, certain types of infrastructure projects like pipelines, conveying systems, or transmission lines are permitted to pass through.
Okay, infrastructure that presumably has to cross these zones, but maybe designed to minimize disturbance.
That seems to be the intention, yes. A third exception is for essential public services, such as the installation of weather radar for monitoring cyclones by the Indian Meteorological Department. Given the mangrove's own role in disaster mitigation, placing monitoring equipment there makes a certain operational sense.
Right.
And finally, large-scale public connectivity projects like the construction of trans-harbor sea links are allowed. But, and this is a crucial caveat mentioned, provided they demonstrate they do not affect the tidal flow of water.
That last point seems critical. Blocking tidal flow would kill the mangroves immediately, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It would completely destabilize and destroy the mangrove habitat itself, so that condition is vital.
Okay. We've conducted a really thorough deep dive here, I think. We've covered the sophisticated physiology, the monumental ecological services, the key distribution sites across India, and the policy challenges surrounding their conservation. Let's try to distill this now into the most critical takeaways for someone trying to learn this.
Yeah, we can definitely categorize these, maybe think of them as factual recall pointers, good for quick memory, and then some broader conceptual analysis insights.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
What are the key facts to remember?
All right, for factual recall, definitely remember the key adaptations. Vivipary, that germination on the parent plant, and the lenticelated bark, coupled with structures like pneumatophores, crucial for gas exchange in that oxygen-poor mud.
And crucially, that blue carbon detail. Mangroves are exceptional carbon sinks, storing potentially up to 5 times the carbon of many tropical forests, mostly locked away in their anaerobic soils.
Definitely. Remember the specific geographic linkages, too. The Sundarbans is the world's largest mangrove system, known for its complex zonation. And that specific habitat connection linking gharials primarily to the Bhitarkanika mangroves in Odisha.
And maybe also the threat correlation, linking the degradation seen in places like Pichavaram and Vedaranyam directly to the spread of aquaculture ponds and salt pans?
Yes, that's a very clear example.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the conservation status is pivotal. Mangrove areas are designated as CRZ-I, meaning they're ecologically sensitive areas where new construction is generally prohibited, barring those few tightly controlled national interest exceptions we discussed.
Perfect. Now for the more conceptual analysis, the mains insights, as you called them, what's the big picture takeaway?
I think the primary takeaway here is recognizing the absolute necessity of an ecosystem-based adaptation approach. Mangrove conservation shouldn't be treated as just some purely environmental niche topic separate from everything else.
Right. It needs to be seen as fundamental to how we plan coastal infrastructure and development.
Absolutely. Their conservation has to be seamlessly integrated into coastal zone management policies and maybe even more broadly into national disaster risk reduction strategies. We need to fully recognize their irreplaceable function as a natural bioshield against tsunamis, storms, and floods. That recognition needs to actively drive development decisions, acknowledging that this natural capital often far outperforms engineered solutions, especially in the long run.
It's like they're a piece of critical infrastructure, but built by nature. One that repairs itself, propagates itself, maintains itself, all while pulling carbon out of the atmosphere.
And that unique combination of resilience and broad ecological benefit is virtually impossible for us to replicate with man-made defenses without truly staggering long-term cost and constant maintenance.
So let's end with a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider. Despite the strong protections supposedly offered by that CRZ-I classification, the slow, subtle degradation from things like industrial pollution and unmanaged upstream development continues to chip away at the long-term health of these amazing self-healing forests. If we lose the complex, deep root structure of just a single thick stand of rhizophora somewhere to pollution or gradual encroachment, how many centuries and how many billions of dollars would humanity actually need to invest in concrete seawalls and carbon capture technology just to replicate the robust protection and essential ecological services that nature currently provides us for free? Think about that trade-off natural integrity versus engineered necessity the next time you happen to look at the coast or a nearby estuary.
That's a profound point on the true, often uncounted value of these coastal guardians. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time, stay curious and keep digging for that deeper knowledge.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Telegram and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.